Hey there, and welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So yesterday, the FCC released their production version of the Broadband Data Collection Fabric. And what is that, and how did it get developed? Well, stand by, and I'll tell you how in just a minute. Actually, we'll hear it from the source. Be right back. Thanks for joining me for Broadband Deployment News. This is Rick Uzzi. So as I mentioned, yesterday was a big day where the FCC released their production version of the Broadband Data Collection Fabric. This is something that ISPs are going to be using to upload their broadband locations. And there was an interview that was done at Fiber Connect. It was light reading. They did an interview with the CEO of CostQuest, who is the contractor. That's the company that contracted to make this Broadband Data Fabric. So I went ahead and grabbed portions of that video that I thought I would show right now, just comment at various times. But I thought this was pretty interesting. I learned some things about how the fabric was created. So here we go. Stand by and we'll get this started. Oh, actually, before I do that, let me make sure I get my ear in here so I can hear what's going on. So just like you can. Stand by 1 second. Put in my ear. And here we go.
Hi, I'm Phil Harvey with Light Reading, and we are here at Fiber Connect in Nashville. And joining me right now is James Stegeman, the CEO of CostQuest. James, first of all, this might be the easiest interview question ever. Who are you and what do you do?
So he lists like 4 things he does. I skipped by the first 3. I'm going to go ahead and post where you can watch this whole video later, but I was trying to condense it down to the points that I thought were most interest as far as answering this question, but he's going to get right to the heart of it here on number 4.
Yeah, so CostQuest is a economic modeling firm. We specialize in broadband deployment. The 4th part, which is probably the most interesting relating to kind of why we're here today, is we were selected by the FCC for the National Broadband Fabric.
Okay.
So we've created a database of 114 million or so building footprints in the U.S. So we know the exact latitude and longitude of that building or a point on the building. And what we've identified are those that either A, have broadband service, or B, require broadband service. So it's an extensive database of potentially all the demand points in the country, including the territories, Alaska, Hawaii. So everything is in it. The FCC is using that to distribute to all the broadband providers. So AT&T, Comcast, Charter, Blue Ridge Telephone, every ISP provider has to report to the FCC which of those locations they provide broadband service to, what technology and what speed. The FCC will then, from that data, from about 3,500 providers, they will then identify which locations are unserved, so under 25.3 for broadband, and which locations are underserved, so under 120.
Okay.
So that information will then be passed over to NTIA. NTIA will then use that to distribute the $42 billion.
So that's basically what we are waiting on. So there's, like you said, there's $42+ billion available in the BEAD program. And that money needs to be distributed based on going to states, and which states have the most unserved areas. Those will be the ones that will get the most of that money. Everybody's going to get a certain minimum, $100 million. But then above that, states will get a certain amount based on how many unserved locations they have. That would be all states. And as you mentioned, territories, Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., et cetera.
Okay. So our fabric is just kind of an underlying normalization data set on which everybody will be working, federal government.
How does the, what you're able to provide the FCC now differ in terms of the old maps, in terms of the data sets available, or the data sets that you've been able to, to assemble?
So he went through an explanation here of what the issue has been, and I'll just really briefly summarize that. So as many of you may know, we've been working off of bad maps that the FCC has put together, and that's primarily because service providers, internet service providers, report their information twice a year using Form 477, and that just basically, they just basically have to say if they provide service in a census block, and if they do, then that whole block is considered served. So even if they just have a few customers on the edge of that census block, There could be other people in that area that are not served, but it's considered served because they are not looking granular enough. So he explained that situation, and then I'd kind of move on here.
It does. So this became an issue in Congress. I testified before congressional committees, one on the cost of broadband deployment, but two on this broadband mapping issue. And that testimony, along with others, is really what triggered the Broadband Data Collection Act, which said we need to solve this and go from census blocks down to location level. So it's an expansion of, there's about 7.5 million blocks reported to the FCC with service. We're now going to go to 114 million individual points,
Okay.
at which people will be able to tell service. So
a lot more granular data, and then a lot less of a likely of a chance that entire, chunks of the population are going to get missed just because somebody on the edge of their census block had service or was served by a provider.
Exactly, and that's really why it's being deployed, is really to help uncover those unserved locations. But in part, this will come down to how well the broadband providers actually report.
Okay.
It's a brand new process.
Sure.
The providers got a beta version of our fabric a month and a half ago, I think it was. So
That was actually April 21st that they came out with the preliminary fabric, the beta version that he's talking about. And that was something that the FCC put out to give service providers the ability to go in to the preliminary fabric, figure it all out, how they need to format their data for the fabric, and then upload that. Was not something that they'd be able to then take that data and put it in the production fabric. It was kind of a way to practice. And all of that is over now because as of yesterday, the production fabric became available.
that they could start the exercise and the thought process, because going from census block level to point level or location level is a big change.
Yeah.
And they have to determine which systems they have can support that, how they're going to pull the information, how they link it to our data set. So there's a lot of thought exercise that has to go on behind the scenes. And hopefully that gets done. The broadband providers have to report September 1st. They'll get.
So when he says they have to report September 1st, really what he's saying is the filing window started yesterday, June 30th, and it goes through September 1st. So they have basically 2 months from then to now to get this in.
Our fabric, I think, on June, the official version, on June 30th.
Yesterday.
So they'll have, 2 months to pull their filing together.
Okay.
So it'll be a first-of-a-kind effort. Hopefully that first round is really good, but as you know, all things that the first time you do it, there's going to be issues that come up.
Sure.
So we'll just have to work through those as they come up.
Okay.
So the FCC gets that out. The challenge for the ISPs, and we've talked to a number already, one told us, well, we're simply just going to pull our billing system addresses. Those are the ones we serve, and we'll file that. The problem is most like phone companies have a 30% take rate. So every other third customer on the street will be in their billing database. The ones in between, they likely serve. It's probably, if the customer calls up and orders service, they can get it. So it's really making sure the broadband providers know not necessarily to rely on their billing database. They either need to look at their cable system footprint, they need to look at their provisioning databases, they need to look at where they can provision service to, not the customers they serve today.
So in other words, homes and businesses passed. So that's something that hopefully most broadband providers know, is like, where do I provide service? If somebody were to call me, can I serve that customer? So that's what they need to provide. And as he's saying here, it's not just who you're billing. And it's really the way the FCC puts it, or the way the Act, actually originally the way the Broadband Data Collection Act put it was, I believe, anybody that you can connect with a standard installation. The way they define standard installation is 10 days. But really what they're saying is anywhere where you can install or provide service to a customer that does not require you to, let's say, extend your mainline plant. So if you've got fiber running to the curb through a neighborhood, those would be standard installations. If there's a location, where they've got a huge long driveway and you've never provided service there, that might not be a standard installation. And that's why a lot of those places are not served. But it's wherever, if somebody called and said, hey, can I get service? And you'd say, sure, let me sign you up. We'll be out there Tuesday at 3 o'clock. That would be kind of a standard installation. So whether you're providing service there or not, if it's in your service area, if it's one of your homes or businesses passed, then that is a location that you need to match up with the location data that's in the Broadband Data Fabric.
So it's just a little bit of a differentiation, but they really need to make sure that's what they really target with the information.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, I mean, it seems like everything's still on path then to be delivered by the fall, right? The new map.
Yeah, I mean, we were under a 120-day time window to get our fabric to the FCC, which was today.
Okay.
We are meeting that today. The FCC, on their side, is developing the broadband data collection system, so they've developed all the tools and software needed for the ISPs to file their information. So that's been tested and they're working through that. So from everything I'm aware of, and I don't work for the FCC, I don't know all the system details,
sure.
But from what I'm aware of, everything looks on target.
And actually, again, even a few days before June 30th, the FCC made available their broadband data collection system. The fabric was not available yet, but they did make the system available where people could log in and start looking around. You need a FCC registration number to access that system, but that system is now available. And in fact, on the 29th, June 29th, they did a webinar where they walked through that system and how service providers would go through and then submit their subscriber information, those that they're already providing services to, the number of subscribers they have, as well as the locations that they can cover, which would include those that are not subscribers. So I will go ahead at the end of this. I'll link again to this full video, but I will also link to that where you can look at that FCC webinar so that you can check that out if you need to do a filing. And I might link to one or two other things that I think will be helpful for you.
What technology goes into, more accurate mapping in the way that you guys are doing it at CostQuest?
It's a good question. So
this is really kind of fascinating as to everything they had to go through to try to figure out what a broadband serviceable location is. And you would think it would just be a matter of, okay, let's find all the addresses in the United States and do they have broadband or not? Well, they did quite a bit more than that, and he'll describe that here.
What providers have done in the past is they use a tool, a geocoder. So it's basically when you go into Google, type in your address, it takes you to a point. The issue there is there's no verification that address actually has a building on it. It's just, It's an address. The other issue is in rural areas, the referential data underlying it doesn't necessarily tell you the exact point. It approximates the point, and it can be pretty far off. So maybe you've experienced it where you typed in an address into Google and you go there and it ain't where you're supposed to be. And you're like, what in the heck? And in part, it's just the referential data is off.
Okay.
So that's one part. The second part is it's the extent of the data. It's back to, is there actually a structure at this address? And does it need broadband? So that's kind of what we bring to the effort. So that's kind of, we're trying to solve the issue of the referential data underlying it. So what we do is we've got partners that we work with that provide us data. So we've got parcel boundaries, so it's legal ownership of land. So we understand that. And then on those parcels, we have a data set of building footprints. So the building footprints it's a polygon from satellite imagery or aerial imagery that they developed AI that actually traces the boundary of the building.
Okay.
So we bring that in. We also bring in tax assessor information that tells us, is it a single family? What's the home improvement value? What's the size of the primary structure? And then we've got some other data fields or databases that come through with addressing information, census information, and we boil that together. We've been working on this for around 3 years now, trying to figure out how you can layer all that information together, come up with machine learning that really identifies which building on the parcel, say there's a garage, a barn, and the house. How do we identify the house? And then two, how do we make sure that is a broadband serviceable location? So we've gone through subject matter reviews. So we've reviewed tens of thousands of images, my staff.
Okay.
We stare at it, we click it and go, yeah, that's the one. And then we incorporate that in as our learning tool into the machine learning or our statistical models to say, this is how you select it. So it's really just a an expansion of just data mining.
Okay.
Is what we're about, combined with our expertise. We've been doing broadband for 20 years. We kind of know what broadband is. We know what broadband locations look like, so we're able to capture our knowledge and pull that into this data mining exercise.
So I can imagine just there. So obviously, there can be certain locations that won't require a lot of machine learning. If you've got a neighborhood with lots of single-family homes, I'm sure it's very accurate. And what they're saying is that you've got these other areas where they're having to look at all these images where you've got multiple structures on a piece of property, and they're looking at it from a human point of view and saying, well, okay, this is where they should have broadband, and then they kind of input that into their system, and through kind of an artificial intelligence machine learning kind of thing, they then hope when they turn the system loose, it's going to look at all of those other parcels that they didn't look at and identify the right place. So there will obviously be some areas that are not right. I think especially in rural areas where you've got multiple structures, all of that will be worked out, but that will be part of the challenge process, I'm sure, when this is done, where we'll find that there are some areas that they're identifying broadband as in one location that's really in another, or there's not broadband where there should be, that kind of thing.
As I was talking to our staff, we were doing a bit of research on CostQuest, and we think you might actually know exactly how big the digital divide is. What is your estimate of how big the digital divide is? Because when we look at things like the FCC map, it's something like 19 million. Other estimates have put it as high as 100 million. How does CostQuest sort of, or does it put a number on it, or do you have some thoughts on how big of a problem we're looking at?
Yes, it's a good question. So we've actually modeled it.
Okay.
So we have worked with a number of states and a number of providers and actually got their deployment level data. We've combined it with our fabric, and from that we've put together statistical models to say, does this location actually have access to this technology? Yes or no? So it's fiber, cable, fixed wireless, and copper. We've run that nationally. And based upon our estimates, the total count of served and unserved, so the first part of the digital divide is actually having access to. So
right.
From that aspect, we're in the 23 to 25 million locations.
Okay.
Or units across the country, which is a bit higher than the FCC, lower than some of the other estimates that you've seen.
Yeah.
But we really try and estimate it based upon, do they have access to a technology?
Okay.
Cable, for the most part, if you have access to cable, you're likely either served or underserved. Underserved is they just haven't deployed higher speeds.
Yeah.
If you've got access to fiber, you're most likely served. It's the copper technologies and the fixed wireless in which our models really come into play and help us understand which potential locations just don't have access to that service. So it's probably about 25 million.
That's interesting, and that's a closer number or a tighter range than I was expecting. Yeah. I appreciate that.
So that's pretty interesting that they feel like they can get that kind of a estimate. So obviously, the next step on this is for the service providers to go in to this fabric and upload the actual maximum upload and download speed, that would be advertised maximum upload and download speed that they have at each one of these locations that CostQuest has designed. So that's the next process in this, and that's what's going to take place during the filing window.
James Stegeman, this is the only broadband economics conversation I've actually looked forward to today. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, and it's been fun talking to you today.
So I found that was pretty interesting. I had no idea really how they created this fabric. It seems like they did put a lot of thought in it, and there's lots of challenges that I'd never thought about as to how hard it would be to figure out where every serviceable location in the United States is, because that's step number one, right? You have to know every place that should have broadband. They may have it already, they may not, but you need to know, is this a place that we should be servicing? Is it a parking lot? Is it a barn? Or is it a home, right? So they have to determine all of that, and again, they've done that through lots of different sources and put that all together to create this fabric, including some of their own due diligence and looking at, as he mentioned, I think he said tens of thousands of images, trying to figure out on maybe some of these harder areas, where should have broadband and where shouldn't, so that the machine learning could take over. So that was what was produced. That's what's now available as of June 30th for internet service providers. So if you are an internet service provider, then you are required to file this. You're going to be required to file this twice a year. This year, you need to file both your Form 477 data, which you've been doing for years, right? You've been doing that twice a year for years, so you still need to do that this year. Plus, you need to file this whole new report that's down to each location. Eventually, I believe that the Form 477 data will go away. I think they definitely want to do it this year to compare things, and they might want to do it for one or two more sessions of that to try to compare, to see how that's comparing with the the BDC data that people are filing. So again, you've got till September 1st now on this, and something you've got to get done. There's not going to be there's not going to be any waivers. There's not going to be any extension. I can almost guarantee it, because number one, the broadband maps, those are the gating item to be able to get these BEAD funds released, the majority of these BEAD funds released. So that is what everybody's waiting on. So the FCC wants to get these maps available as soon as possible. And they provided this preliminary beta fabric, as he called it, that's been available since April, that service providers had access to try to figure this all out. There's lots of help available up on the FCC website on how to do this. There's a place where you can click a button and submit a question, so they're providing lots of help there. So again, I will help you out if you're not aware of that by posting a few of these things, including the webinar from yesterday, including, I'll go ahead and post a video where it's on the help site, but I have it starting right where it tells how to match your data. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to go out and you've got to, as he said, you've got to find out every single location where you can serve with a standard installation. So you've got to have that database together. Once you have that database together, and that's going to be street addresses, right? Once you have that together, you're going to download the FCC, the Broadband Data Fabric that CostQuest created from that site. You're going to, or CostQuest will send it to you, I believe. I think you requested they send it to you. So you're going to get that broadband fabric. Then you got to match those two things together. Now there are going to be addresses in the broadband fabric, but there are also location IDs. And when you upload your information as to where you serve, you cannot upload addresses. You have to upload the FCC location IDs, which means you need to match that stuff first. There's two ways to do that. You can do that by doing text matching in Excel. You know, you've got one spreadsheet, CSV, you've got another CSV, and you can do some text joins and matches, lookups, text lookups. You know, they explain that in that video on how you can try to put those two spreadsheets together so that you can have the addresses you serve match up with a location ID in the broadband fabric. That's one way to do it. The other is, and it's also in that video, if after the text matching stuff, it goes into how you can upload shapefiles. So you can get a there's a open source GSI or GIS, GIS software and OpenStreetMaps, and you can use those two things and take the broadband fabric data in your area and overlay that into this GIS system, and then you can just draw polygons around the serviceable locations on the map. So you can say, okay, well, I serve this area. These are all the serviceable locations. You can draw polygons around that. You've got to upload the same information as far as max upload and download speed that's advertised, and whether or not it's low latency, the type of service it is. Is it cable, DSL, wireless, fiber, that kind of thing. So you still have to upload that data, but you can do it in shape files instead of having to match these spreadsheets. So there's two ways to do it, and I will link to the tutorial, the FCC tutorial video where they explain how to do it. Now, it's not perfect, I can tell you. We've tried to duplicate what they're doing in Excel, and I just haven't had the time to take a look at it. I've had somebody else looking at it, and it does not look easy, you know, so you've got to kind of go through that. So maybe if you have an Excel expert, they can figure that out. Or it seems to me the shape files would be easier if you could do it that way. So I'll link to those things as well. So thanks for joining me. If this was helpful, please give me a like on the video, and go ahead and subscribe if you're not subscribed. If you do subscribe, click the bell and you'll be notified whenever I am live. I'm live every day at some point during the day for Broadband Deployment News, or on Tuesdays, Tech Tuesday at 3 o'clock. So I will see you next time. Bye-bye.